Hey guys, happy Halloween. My name is J-Chip, and today I'm going to be doing a tier list of the big three slasher franchises: Friday the 13th, Halloween, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Let's get to this. Kicking things off, I think we're going to start with Halloween 1. And Halloween 1 gets an S rank for me. Halloween 1 is a certified classic. It's a great staple for Halloween, and it's just an amazing horror movie just in general. It's so simple, yet it's so beautiful at the same time. Michael Myers is a cool character. Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode did a phenomenal job. And of course, Dr. Loomis is a fantastic character and one of the best scores by John Carpenter. Next up, we're going to talk about Nightmare on Elm Street. And, I don't like having two S's back to back, but A Nightmare on Elm Street is a really good movie. Now, yeah, the ending kind of sucks, but everything else is just so damn good. Freddy Krueger legit scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, and it's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. You got Johnny Depp in his starring role, and he gets a brutal death. A Nightmare on Elm Street is just so creative, it's so scary, it's got a lot of tension, and Freddy Krueger is the man. He's one of my favorite horror icons, if not my favorite, and I just love this movie, so yeah, I'm going to put it next to Halloween, though I will say I kind of like Halloween 1 a little bit more, but A Nightmare on Elm Street is still a classic. I find it interesting that people will tell you that Halloween 1 is the best in the franchise, and people will tell you that A Nightmare on Elm Street is also the best in the franchise, but nobody really talks about how Friday the 13th Part 1 is the best in the franchise. And for me personally, I'm going to give it a B. It's definitely a B slasher film. The only thing that's holding it is the gore, the cool soundtrack, and just the lore around Jason, and just the fact that it kind of birthed a pretty cool franchise, but it's got some weak characters, and the villain reveal at the end, as we all know, is Mrs. Voorhees, Jason's mom, was really weak. It's just like the minute she's revealed, she's instantly the killer, and they're like, oh, it's a mystery on who the killer is, but, you could have had some better way to have the big reveal. But all in all, still an enjoyable movie, but definitely not the best in the franchise, in my opinion at least. Next up is Halloween 2. And while it is flawed compared to its predecessor, I still think it's a pretty good movie. I love the hospital setting, and it has some really cool kills. They definitely upped the gore for this one. And it's really cool watching this movie right after Halloween 1. And it's definitely a full experience if you do it like that. I think it's a really fun time, and it's an enjoyable film. It's definitely one of the better Halloween sequels, so I have no problem giving it an A. Oh boy, up next is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. A pretty good film. It's definitely the weirdest out of the bunch, just because the characters are just so out there and weird, and just the entire story of it about Freddy coming out of this man's body to get his revenge on Elm Street. It's just really weird, and it's still enjoyable. I mean, there's some pretty cool moments where, like, Freddy kills a bunch of people in a pool party. Sure, it doesn't fit the character, but that's still a pretty cool scene nonetheless. And some of the acting is pretty decent, I would say. Though, I guess I would give it a B. I do like it more than the original Friday the 13th. But A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 is still a solid movie. It's got some flaws, especially towards the end. And again, it's just a really weird movie. Up next is Friday the 13th Part 2. And I definitely enjoy this movie a lot more than the original. It's got a better cast of characters. Jason's in it. There's some really cool kills. However, the gore is a little bit toned down compared to the original. I think Tom Savini is just like the pinnacle when it comes to gore effects. And while the gore effects in Part 2 is not bad, it just can't compare to the original. However, my main issues with Friday the 13th Part 2 is that it's the same formula as the original, and I just wish they would just change it up. And also, I'm just not a big fan of Sackboy Jason. I just think he looks kind of stupid with his sack head and his overalls, and for whatever reason, like the face they use, just looks weird giving him a beard and long hair and shit. So I'm not a fan of the design. However, I do enjoy it more than the original, but I am going to give it a B. I don't know if I like Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 more than Friday the 13th Part 2, but I think I'm just going to leave it at that, and, maybe I'll update it one day. Halloween 3 Season of the Witches is an amazing film. Now, this got shit on just because it didn't have Michael Myers. They wanted to do the anthology series. It's nothing like the first two Halloween movies, but it is an amazing, amazing film. And if it didn't have Halloween 3 in the title, I think this could have been one of the best horror movies in the 80s. I kind of want to see a world where this movie was as successful as the original Halloween, just to see what would happen afterwards. I'm going to give it an A, and I definitely like this over Halloween 2, but I like Halloween 1 and A Nightmare on Elm Street more, so I'm not going to put it up in S tier, but it is a fantastic film, and I highly recommend it. Next up is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors, and yeah, this is getting an S tier. And I do like it more than the original Nightmare on Elm Street just because of the soundtrack, the characters. Freddy is awesome. He's got a perfect blend of just serious Freddy and comical Freddy. Every time I watch this movie, I just love it more and more. And the Dawkins soundtrack, man, it is so good. And it has some of my favorite kills in the franchise with the TV kill, welcome to primetime, bitch. And this could have been the best ending to the franchise in my opinion, but obviously they made more. But, if they just stopped it right there, I think it could have been a perfect way to end Freddy and just that entire franchise. However, they didn't, and, some of the other movies are pretty cool, but in my opinion, this is the peak of A Nightmare on Elm Street and is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I love it so much. Next up is Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, and this one's just okay. It's got some pretty lame characters, and the pacing is just awful. It's so boring in the first half. It does pick up towards the second half, but it's like, you're kind of too late. The kills are cool in this movie, and you do get the iconic Jason mask that makes his debut in this movie, but for the most part, I'm just going to give the movie a C. It's just okay. Up next is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. So obviously Halloween 3 didn't do so well, so they brought back Michael Myers. And I do really like this movie. It's pretty solid, it's pretty straightforward, it has an iconic ending, but the only thing that's holding me back for me personally is just the mask. Michael Myers just looks stupid with his mask that's just all white and his eyes just looks like he's shocked all the time. I just think it looks dumb. Also, there are some unlikable characters in this movie, but it's still a pretty good movie, and I do like it a lot, so I would put it in B, and I do like it more than these three right here. Pretty solid Halloween movie. Up next is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, and this is kind of the beginning of a pretty bad string of Friday movies coming up next, and it's not terrible, it's just alright. There's some pretty cool characters, and it's got some pretty unique kills in this movie, but Freddy is just too goofy in this one, and this is definitely the beginning of the MTV Freddy, where he's just cracking up wise-ass jokes and one-liners every 5 seconds. Some of it hits, some of it's kind of lame, but still, it's not an awful movie. I would be willing to put it in B, and I do enjoy it more than Friday the 13th Part 1. It's a solid movie, but nowhere near as good as 3 or 1, or even 2. I like 2 a little bit more. Next up is Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. And while it's not the final chapter, it's one of my favorites in this franchise. You got a great cast of characters. Crispin Freeman plays like this dorky ass character, and unfortunately he gets one of the most brutal deaths in the movies, but he's a hilarious character. And same with his best friend Ted, who is just like this asshole. I don't know why they're friends, because the guy is just busting his balls constantly, but they're a fun duo. And the rest of the characters are pretty fun too. You have Ted White as Jason, and in my opinion, this is probably my favorite version of Jason. He's brutal, he's sadistic, he's sinister. I like this Jason a whole lot. And unfortunately, Ted White did pass away, which sucks, but, you know, the gore effects in this movie are really good. Tom Savini comes back. I love this movie a lot. I'm going to give it an A. And the only reason why I'm not going to give it an S tier is just because I look at these three movies and I think, you know, these are like some of the pinnacles in the Friday in their franchises, and the final chapter is one of my favorites, but it's not my favorite of the Friday the 13th movies. We'll be getting to that a little bit later, but still, very solid movie. Love it to death, and I can't wait to watch it again. Next up is Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and yeah, this is going straight into F tier. This movie is god fucking awful. It takes everything that was great about Halloween 4 and that great ending with Jamie Lee Curtis with the scissors in her hand, and they just fucking shit all over it. For whatever reason, they make Jamie into a mute. They kill off Rachel, who was one of the best characters in Halloween 4, and they replace her with Tina. Tina fucking sucks. She's an annoying character, and for whatever reason, there's just too much goofy comedy into this where I can't even take it seriously, like the two dumb fuck cops. Also, Michael looks even stupider than he did in Halloween 4. He just looks awful with his slick back hair. It just looks odd, and I'm not a fan of that. Up next is A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And yeah, this one's bad. I'm not going to put it in F tier just because there are some cool characters. However, the worst part about this movie is Freddy himself. He's way too goofy, and this is when the comedy just goes way up. And this movie is trying to be dark and gritty, and Freddy just ruins the tone. There are some really cool kills, especially Dan's death, the motorcycle one. But if you watch the unrated version, it's way better and it's way more gruesome. There's some really disturbing deaths in this movie, but unfortunately they couldn't use them for the American audiences. However, if you do have a UK VHS, you can see that shit uncut. However, that doesn't save this movie's story because it's not that great. It has some interesting ideas, but they weren't executed very well. So I'm just going to give it a D and call it a day. Up next is Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. And, yeah, I could see why some people would put it in F tier. But honestly, I kind of enjoyed it. So I'm going to put it in D tier just because it is a pretty bad movie. I like it way more than Dream Child, but it's a trashy-ass film. There's a lot of swearing. There's a lot of nudity. This was directed by a porn director, and it's just really trashy. I do like the idea of Tommy kind of going to the psych ward and him kind of turning crazy and possibly being a new Jason. And Jason's not the killer in this movie. It is some cop named Roy. Interesting idea, interesting plot, but they didn't really execute it very well. However, if you do go into this movie, definitely just go into it for the fun factor. It's not a great story, it's not a great movie, but it is fun. There's some really cool kills in it, and some of the dialogue is just pretty hilarious. Up next is Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, and we got both versions here. When it comes down to these two, I think they're one and the same. I don't really like any of them more than the other. In fact, I don't even like any of these. There are some pretty cool kills, and there is some really good tension in this movie, and I love the way Michael looks. I think this is one of the best looking Michaels But in the end, they kind of just fucked themselves over with how many people were in production of making this goddamn movie. So I'm going to give it a D. I do like it more than Dream Child. Child actually might go down to an F, but we're going to get to Freddy's Dead in a little bit. But yeah, Halloween Curse of Michael Myers, not really good. And both versions are not that great. So I don't know what to tell you. Both are pretty bad. So if I had to recommend, I'd recommend just watching them both and making up your own opinion. Both are pretty awful. Though I will give the edge to the production cut because you do get more Loomis. And Loomis is a really good character. And unfortunately that was his last one. Up next is Freddy's Dead. It goes into F tier. Enough said. Up next is Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. This is my favorite Friday the 13th movie. And I am going to give this an S tier. It doesn't take itself seriously, but it's directed so well. It's very self-aware with its humor. It's got some really good kills. Jason is awesome. And the Alice Cooper soundtrack is amazing. I love this movie so much. It's my favorite Friday the 13th movie. I do like these three more than Jason Lives, but Jason Lives is a must-watch every time I'm in the mood for a Friday the 13th movie. I can't get enough of it. I love it to death. It's awesome. Up next is Halloween H2O, and this is my favorite Halloween sequel out there. I think the story is fantastic. I love the ending, and in fact, I think H2O is the definitive ending to the Halloween franchise, and everything that came out after that is just bonus content. I think the way they ended it off was perfect. Jamie Lee Curtis was awesome. Michael was awesome. And they even had a rapper who didn't do a terrible job. He was a pretty good actor in this movie, and he wasn't annoying unlike Busta Rhymes here in Resurrection. But we'll get to that. H2O gets an A, and I do like it more than all of these films. H2O, in my opinion, is a fantastic way to end off the Halloween franchise, and unfortunately, it isn't the end, and unfortunately, they did retcon it, but to me, this is the ending. This is the canon ending to Halloween. Up next is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and for a while, I actually really hated this movie, and maybe it was because I was young and dumb and didn't really pay attention to films, but I just hated how everything was played out, and the fact that it's not really a Freddy movie. It was way too meta for my liking, but as I've gotten older and as my taste has gotten better, New Nightmare is a fucking awesome film, and I'm actually going to put it in A tier. Now, the only reason why I'm not going to put it in S tier is because it isn't a Freddy movie, and that kind of holds it down. And I know that's not the point, but I wanted my man Freddy in it. And I'm so glad they didn't make him into a comedy fucking stupid motherfucker like they did in Freddy's Dead. They made him scary, and this is one of the scariest incarnations of Freddy ever. But for me, it's definitely an A. Up next is Friday the 13th, Part 7, New Blood. And I can take it or leave it with this one. It has some cool ideas with Jason versus Carrie with the whole telekinesis power that Tina has. It's pretty cool. My only complaints is that the characters are pretty weak, and the MPAA fucked this movie raw. And all the cool kills that were in this movie got fucking butchered. And it could have been one of the best Friday the 13th movies to watch just for pure gore, but it's not. A lot of the kills are pretty tame. But this is the introduction to Kane Hodder, Jason. And while he's not my favorite version of Jason, he did pretty cool in this one. There's some pretty cool stunts. I'll give it a C tier. Up next is Halloween Resurrection. And yeah, it's bad. It's getting an F tier, though I do like it more than Halloween 5. And I like it especially more than Freddy's Dead. There is some cool moments in this movie, but it's bogged down by that shitty beginning that ruins H2O for me. And Busta Rhymes just kills this movie. I can't take him seriously. And this movie in general, I can't take seriously. It's a piece of shit film, but it's not the worst in this franchise. We'll get to that later. Alright, so I'm not going to be doing Freddy vs. Jason. We'll get to that a little bit later, but the next movie we're going to talk about is Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. And I'm going to give it a D tier. I do have some enjoyment with this movie. It's definitely very flawed, but I don't know, I had fun with it. The idea of Jason going to Manhattan is pretty cool, but they don't get to Manhattan until like the very end of the film. And for the most part, he's just on a boat. And yeah, there are some cool kills. There are some cool moments. But overall, it's a very forgettable Jason movie, in my opinion. Alright, we're going to get to the remake section of this tier list later. And we're going to jump right into Jason Goes to Hell. And in my opinion, this is the worst Friday the 13th movie. Or worst Jason movie. It's just... They take a simple storyline like Friday the 13th and they decided to give it this most convoluted, ass-backwards fucking weird story. Jason's barely in it. Jason just takes over people's bodies for some fucking reason because that's what he was able to do this entire time. I don't know why. They just fucking decided to throw that out there. There is some cool ideas, but overall, I am just not a big fan of Jason Goes to Hell, and in my opinion, it's the worst one. And the only good thing that I do like about it is that it does set up Freddy vs. Jason. Other than that, this is an awful Jason movie. Alright, next up we're going to talk about Jason X. And Jason X is going to get a C tier. Now, I do kind of have a lot of nostalgia for this one because this was my first introduction to Jason. And, you know, I get why people hate this movie, but it's just a fun, stupid movie. It's a fun, stupid slasher movie that you watch just to have fun. It's not meant to be taken seriously. It's literally about Jason going to space. Alright, and now we get to Freddy vs. Jason, and I love this movie. I'm going to give it an A tier, and I'm going to put it over these two. Yeah, Freddy vs. Jason is an awesome movie. The fight is fucking awesome. It's brutal. The soundtrack is fucking awesome. The look of it is awesome. And I just love watching this movie because it's so much fun. Alright, and now we get to the remake section of this tier list. And we're going to start with Rob Zombie's Halloween. Rob Zombie's Halloween is a D tier. I don't think it's that great. Yeah, I would actually say it's the worst of the D tiers for now. I'm just not a fan of Rob Zombie's writing. I think he's an awful writer. He's a decent director, and once Michael actually starts his attack on Haddonfield, it's not terrible, but I just hate the fucking hillbilly hick fucking characters that he fucking brought up. Up next is the Friday the 13th remake, and it's pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's awful. I would put it in C tier, though. Just because I'm not really a big fan of how Jason's kind of like the Batman, where he's standing up on rooftops and fucking creating booby traps and shit like that. But it's still an entertaining Friday the 13th nonetheless. And sure, yeah, the characters are shit. But you can say that about most of the Friday the 13th characters. And the ones you do hate do get the most brutal deaths you can possibly think of. So, at least you got that going for you. Overall, I would say the remake's a fun movie if you want to just watch a slasher movie. But it's not really a great Friday the 13th movie for me personally. Just because, well, I'm not a fan of how they did Jason in this one. Up next, we got the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. And, yeah, I'm not a fan of this one. I hate how they fucking wrote Freddy. I hate all the fucking characters. And the best part about the movie, in my opinion, is James Jude Courtney as Freddy Krueger. Now, keep in mind, he is no Robert Englund, but he did a good job. It's just, the script he was given was fucking awful. And I think if there was a better person in charge of that, and if there was a better team that could actually make a good Nightmare on Elm Street movie, I think James Jude Courtney would have done a much better job. Up next, we got the Halloween 2 remake. And if this was the director's cut version, we would be giving it an F. But the theatrical cut version, I'm going to give a D. It's pretty decent, and you don't get Michael talking and saying die and fucking all that horse shit that is in the director's cut version. Like I said about the original Halloween remake by Rob Zombie is a fucking awful writer. He's a decent director. So if you're ever going to watch this movie, watch the theatrical version. Do not fuck around with that awful director's cut. Trust me. Now, still, the theatrical cut version isn't great. I wouldn't really recommend this movie. But I guess it's a fun time to see Michael absolutely brutalize some of his victims. I guess that's kind of cool. And now we get to Halloween Kills. And I'm going to give Halloween Kills a D. Now, I could see why some people would like this movie. If you just want to see Michael kill a whole fucking bunch of people, this movie's for you. But for me personally, the story just isn't there. The story is pretty lame. I do like the idea of a mob mentality, but all the characters are just fucking stupid. And it's like no one ever decided to sit anybody down and be like the voice of reason that maybe, trying to go after Michael and the whole evil dies tonight might be a bad idea. But no. They all just want to go after Michael Myers like he's nothing. But still, some of the kills are pretty cool. And it's not the worst Halloween movie. And finally, we have Halloween Ends. And Halloween Ends goes right into F tier. I hated this movie. They made Michael look like a fucking bitch, and Michael's not even in this movie for like a good chunk of this film. You make him into a fucking juggernaut of a fucking character in Halloween Kills, and then you downgrade him so fucking much, it's unreal. And then they have this other kid who's like gonna be the next Michael, but nobody really cares. At least I didn't care. I don't give a fuck if they're going to try to replace Michael. We want Michael. That's what this franchise is. It's his franchise. I actually want to see the fight between Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. And even that is super fucking underwhelming. And it's like, if you're going into this movie for that, you're going to be severely fucking disappointed. In my opinion, this is the worst Halloween movie. And maybe that's recency bias. Maybe I gotta wait until it settles in a little bit more. But for right now, it's fucking awful, and I hate it. And that's gonna be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below on what your tier list would look like. I'd be very interested in that. And I hope you all have a good Halloween.